Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Venus, and today I'm talking about my top 10 favorite thrillers of all time. I am so excited to share this list with you. When I was putting it together, I realized that there's so many different types of thrillers. There's paranormal thrillers, there's psychological thrillers, there's thrillers with some horror in it, and I've got a little bit of popcorn thrillers. Those are super popular right now, where you just kind of fly through them. But I have a little bit of everything on this list. And instead of going from like I don't want to say least favorite, but from like 10 to 1, I've done it by publication date. So we're going to start with the oldest thrillers on this list and to the new releases from 2024, because there are a couple from this year that are on this list. I do want to give an honorable mention to If Something Happens to Me by Alex Finlay. This was a new release for this year. I loved it so much. It's super fast paced. It's very cinematic. I love this author's writing style. In this book, we are following a character who is with his girlfriend when they're in like high school, and while they're out on a date in their car, she is like torn from the car. He's hit over the head, and her car and her body disappear. So she's never to be found again. He is, of course, a suspect in this case, but he gets off because there's no evidence. He tries to move on with his life from this horrible tragedy, and he changes his name and he goes to law school and he's living his life. And then all of a sudden he sees this man that's been haunting his dreams since this event happened. And then the car that they were in is discovered, but her body is missing. So you go on this wild chase through like Tuscany and the UK, and I think Paris. There's like all these different locations. There's a mobster involved in this. There's a young sheriff deputy that's in it, and you get different perspectives from each character, and it's such a fun ride. I loved this book so much, so I definitely wanted to make it an honorable mention. Now let's start with my top 10 favorite thrillers of all time. Coming in the oldest spot is publication date of 2008, and that is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and that is by Stieg Larsson. And I just mentioned this book in a video that I did about the darkest books that I've ever read, and this was on that list. This is a translated work from Swedish. It is a psychological thriller. It is very well known back for when it came out. It started off as a trilogy, and when the author passed away, another author carried on the storyline. I have only read the first 3 books in the story and in the series, and I absolutely loved them. So in this book, we are following a journalist who was recently accused of libel against a very wealthy, higher up figure in the finance world. So while he is working his way through that and trying to get out of that situation, he is hired by a very wealthy family to figure out what happened to one of the family members that went missing many years ago. He ends up getting assistance from a young woman who has a million tattoos. She's got all these piercings, but she is excellent at computer hacking. So together they work on trying to figure out what happened to this young woman. You are also learning about, her name is Lisbeth, the hacker. You're learning about her past, which is very, very rough. She is under guardianship, and her most recent guardian has passed away. So they've assigned her to a new guardian who ends up being absolutely horrific. And there is a scene in this book between her and this man that I will never, ever forget. She is very much determined to get vengeance on anything horrible that has happened to her. And it's just a really interesting read because you're dealing with that, but then you're also finding out about this horrific family, not the whole family, but members in this horrific family, and the reason why this young woman went missing. And it gets very dark. It's a lot of sexual assault against women and how wealthy people basically can get away with murder. So I had to mention this book, again, coming in from 2008. Next up from 2012 is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Had to put this on my list as well. This is a book that got me very much into reading more thrillers. This is a very popular book. A lot of you probably already know about it, but it also has a movie that came out with it as well that I did like also. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo also has adaptations both in Swedish and in English. So in Gone Girl, we are following this married couple, Amy and Nick, and we get POVs from both of them. Nick comes home on, I believe it's their anniversary, and finds that Amy is missing, and the house has looked like there's been a struggle in it. So he reports her disappearance. Then you kind of figure out where Amy is and what's going on. You're getting glimpses of her journal entries These are both very much unreliable characters. You have no idea who's telling the truth, what's going on. The twist in this was absolutely incredible. It is definitely a page turner. And I don't want to say more than that because it's best to go into this without knowing very much, as is with all of these thrillers, but this one especially. This one was just a juicy hot mess and I loved every page of it. Next up is from 2018 and it's Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a young adult like mystery thriller, and one of the first audiobooks that I really listened to when I was commuting back and forth from work and really getting into audiobooks. And this was just an absolutely incredible audiobook. So if you do end up checking this out, I definitely recommend the audiobook. So in this book, we are following Sadie. She is a young girl who lives in poverty in a small town. I think they may even live in a trailer park, and she is taking care of her younger sister, Maddie. And Maddie ends up dead and they don't know who did it. And Sadie is determined to figure out what happened to her sister. So you go on this journey with Sadie trying to find the killer of her sister, definitely seek revenge, and then enters a radio personality who decides to start a podcast and trace this story and also try to figure out what happened to Maddie. This book was so engaging. Like I said, the audiobook, there were times when I didn't even want to get out of my car. I just wanted to sit in my car and listen to this book and find out how it was going to end. It is definitely a tearjerker, but it is just had to be on this list. Just one of my favorite thrillers of all time. And it was heart-wrenching too. So, and it also shows you how people in poverty, regardless of race, how they're treated when someone passes away, when someone's murdered. It's just not as important as other human beings that die sometimes. And it's just so sad to read about. And it was a great read. So highly recommend it. Next up we have from 2018 is The One by John Mars. This book is so good. This has a little bit of sci-fi in it, so it's like a sci-fi thriller. But we are in a world where one swab of your DNA can tell you who your perfect match is, like your soulmate. And you have a choice that once you find out who this person is, do you break up your marriage or go on a search for this person? And you find yourself following these different characters in situations that are so interesting and make you think, well, how would I react if this was who my match was? Like, is it a serial killer? Am I a straight person who is matched with same sex? Do I leave my wife or spouse for this other person, even though I've never had feelings like that before in my life? This was just such a fun ride. John Mars comes up with the craziest scenarios in his book, and this was definitely one of my favorites and just unputdownable. Next up is The Silent Patient from 2019 by Alex Michaelides. I had to put this book on this list. This is another book that is forever going to be in my brain. It's always going to be one of my favorites. And to me, it truly is one of the best psychological thrillers that I have read. We are following this woman named Alicia, and she seems to have the perfect life until she decides to shoot her husband in the face 5 times and goes completely silent afterwards. Does not talk about what happened, does not talk about why she did it. She is an artist, and after this happens, of course, her art is being sold for a shit ton of money. She is taken to this secure forensic unit in London where she is basically living out her life. And a psychotherapist by the name of Theo comes and is determined to work with her and try to figure out what happened and get her to speak. For me, didn't see the twist coming. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I know there's some people that absolutely hated this book, which is going to be like that with most of the books on my list. You either absolutely loved it or you absolutely hated it. But for me, this one will, again, always be a favorite psychological thriller that I look back on, and I can't imagine it not being on my top 10 list. Next up is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. I also talked about this book on my the darkest books that I've ever read. I will post that video down below, but this was published in 2021 and absolutely incredible. In this book, we are following 2 ex-cons who have 2 sons that were gay. And one is white, one is black, and they ended up married. I think they were married, but they were a couple. and they both ended up murdered. So these two ex-cons have to put aside their own prejudices against not only homophobia, but also race, and work together to try to figure out what happened to their sons and hopefully set things right the best way that they can. So you go on this very action-packed journey with these two men as they discover what happened to their sons and the world that they were involved in and things that were happening. And I swear when I was reading this, I wanted it to be a movie so bad. I was envisioning Denzel Washington and Matthew McConaughey as the two fathers, and then picture also the cast of Sons of Anarchy involved in it also. Such a fantastic thriller. This author is one of my favorite thriller authors of all time. I've read 3 books by him now, and they've all been incredible. So highly recommend this book. This next book, I'm sure I'm going to get judged on. This is from a very popular author, puts out thriller books every single year, and this one seems to be, by the majority, his least favorite book written by a lot of people. But for me, it is my favorite, and that is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This book came out in 2022. And it's my favorite Riley Sager book. In this book, we are following a recently widowed actress who has decided to kind of get away to her family's lake house in Vermont. She's drinking too much. She's got her binoculars and her bourbon. She is definitely an unreliable character because she drinks a little bit too much bourbon. But she likes to watch this couple that is across the lake from her. I believe the gentleman is very wealthy, and his girlfriend or wife, I can't remember, is like a supermodel, and she spies on them. She watches them. And one day she sees that the wife is basically drowning in the lake. So she jumps out and she rescues her, and they spark up a friendship. As she becomes close to this couple, not close, but closer to the woman, she realizes that they may have some secrets, and then one day this woman goes missing. So she is determined to try to figure out what happened to this woman, and there's all kinds of freaking awesome twists. I love the twists in this book. A lot of people absolutely hated it, but I loved where it went. I'm so happy he went there. And yeah, this is my absolute favorite Riley Sager book. It is best to not get any more information about this book before reading it. So let me know if this was one of your favorites, or if you're on the other side and you absolutely hated it. I would love to know down below how many of us love this book versus absolutely hated it. Next up is Upgrade by Blake Crouch. This was released in 2022. This is a sci-fi thriller, and it is my favorite Blake Crouch book that I've read. Another book that a lot of people actually didn't like compared to the rest of his books, but for me, it is a favorite. We are following Logan, and he has basically had his genome, his DNA hacked. And he's noticing subtle differences in his body, his strength, the way he's thinking, how fast he can read. There's all these little changes that are happening. And he's trying to figure out what happened. His family has a very dark secret that is also related to what is happening to him. And he is like one of the last people on Earth that can stop this crazy thing that's happening with DNA being hacked. And that's all I'm going to say. It is a fun ride. You will notice that I like books that are very cinematic and can be movies. Definitely think that this could be made into a movie. I was getting a lot of Jason Bourne Identity vibes as I was reading this. There's a lot of action in it. And it was so good. I love this book so much, but also it makes you think about what if this happened in our world, you know, how things could be different. I love books that make you feel like that, make you feel a little uneasy about how science can actually possibly do certain things, completely change the course of humankind as we know it. So yeah, another fantastic book that I highly recommend. And then released this year is Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. Such a good thriller book. God, I love this book so much. In this book, we are following 2 women that had very tragic things happen to both of them. They end up meeting, and as they're discussing the things that have happened to their families and the revenge they are trying to seek on the people that got away with certain things, they come up with a plan. If you kill for me, I'll kill for you. And it goes from there. But then you have another character, I think her name was Ruth, that was basically almost killed in her home, and she survives. And she is haunted by these blue eyes that are from the person that assaulted her. And you go on her journey as well. And of course, they all intermingle at the end. And it was fantastic The twist was so good in this book. I will never forget it, and I loved it. So definitely check this one out. I have not read anything else by this author, but I'm very excited to read more from him. And another 2024 release is The Ascent, and that is by Adam Platinga. Another action-packed, fantastic. Oh, this book was so good. I wish more people were talking about it. This is about a cop who has recently lost his wife and his job, and he is traveling, and I think he stops at like a fair or something, some kind of outdoor event, and he sees this young woman being dragged into the woods, getting ready to be sexually assaulted, and he goes and he beats the shit out of the man that is almost sexually assaulting this woman. And it's in this like a small Missouri town. We'll come to find out the man that is assaulting this woman is the brother of the sheriff, I think, in this town. So he immediately gets locked up in a maximum security prison. And then we're also following a young woman who decides, I think she's the governor's daughter. She decides to go and tour this maximum prison on the same day that, what is his name? That Argento gets locked up. So when she is there and he is getting locked up, they realize that all of the gates have been opened in this maximum security prison with some of the worst criminals you could possibly imagine, with the more tame criminals being on the lower level and the absolute worst criminals on the top level. So Argento has to try to get them all safely to the top, which is like where the roof is, so they can get out of this prison alive. And he has the young woman himself, some of the staff from the prison, as well as the governor's daughters, like two, I don't know, like bodyguards, one of which is a complete jerk. You follow them as they meet some of these criminals, and there is a canoe scene that I will never forget. That's all I'm going to say. This was very, very well written. Again, very action-packed. There are definitely some very violent scenes in this, so please check triggers. The author of this book was a police officer, so I feel like you get a lot of like that grittiness and that behind the scenes of things, you know, in the police force. And it's fantastic. I hope he comes out with more books. I loved this so much. Again, this came out this year. Please check it out. And if you do read it, let me know down below. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 favorite thrillers of all time. I always like to hear from you guys down below. Please leave me your favorite thrillers because I do put them on my TBR. There have actually been a couple recommendations that I've ordered, that I've bought, that I'm going to read at some point and talk about. So I do actually pay attention to those things. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you again soon. See ya.